Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to meet you all. And I'm honored to be part of your group this lunch hour. I take it I'm snatching your lunch hour away from you, so please feel free to eat, okay? Tell me, could you just show me, are you first, second, third year students, residents? Where are you? First year? Everybody's first year? Your fourth year? All right. Well, I did my schooling at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and the 6-year program. So I was taken out of high school and I went year round for 6 years. And then I went into emergency medicine and I did my emergency medicine residency at Truman Medical Center in Kansas City. That's the third oldest program in the country. And we were trained by Vietnam vets. So it was lots of trauma. I loved it, still love trauma. So I worked in the emergency medicine field for 28 years. And about 3 years ago, I left the full-time practice of emergency medicine to do more teaching and preaching of the Bible. So I've sort of made a bit of a move from that. And what that tells you is concerning our topic of money and life today, to just sort of condense it down to that topic. What that tells you is that we've been at both ends of the spectrum. So I was married in medical school, so we were dirt poor. I mean, we were poor. We sold a car to survive. I did odd jobs to survive. We were poor. And as soon as I finished my residency, or as soon as I finished medical school, I started my residency. Now, you guys today are probably making somewhere around 50 or 60K a year. I was making 18K a year. So that was what we had as a couple to survive on. We had a child in the last year of medical school. So we were a family of 3 and we lived on 18,000 a year. So for 3 years, I worked at that, gradually made 21,000 a year. And then at the end of that, I started in the workforce. And obviously I needed to get in the workforce because I had mouths to feed. And I went from making $20,000 a year to $120,000 in about 24 hours. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that in your situation over the next 7, 8 years, whatever your schooling or residency requires of you, you'll have 8 years to think this topic through. But no one talks about this topic, especially from a Christian perspective, which is what I would be bringing you today. So I'm going to begin by telling you a little story of how the Lord taught me this thing. I'm assuming that you know Christ as your Savior. I'm assuming that you are joining today because you're interested in what God has to say about your life in this particular area of your stewardship. And if that's not the case, then by all means, I would suggest that you strongly consider Christianity, because it is by far and away the most joyous and stabilizing understanding and worldview that you'll ever come across. And I've been through the whole thing in terms of doubting faith and questioning God. So I strongly urge you that way. But I'm making the assumption, somewhat dangerously so, that you're wanting to know the Christian worldview. So having said that, let me tell you this story. So after I finished my residency, my income level changed in 24 hours by 5 times, okay? Over the next 30 years or 25 years that I practiced, it went up by another 5 times, all right? And so eventually I ended up being director of my emergency department and president of our company. So, you know, in terms of career path, I was at the top of the food chain of my career path. I thought about going into academia, but I needed to feed too many children, so I didn't go academia, but I've loved academia ever since. So when you get out into the workforce, you know, especially in emergency medicine, all you got to do is work an extra shift, and you can generate somewhere between $1,000 to $3,000 in about 12 hours. So you start to get tempted, and you say, "Well, I'll just work another shift here and there and wherever." And you don't think it costs you much, but it actually costs you a lot. And so what happened one year, I was working night shifts. And, you know, I'm not a night shift person. I hate them. I never liked them, but I was working night shifts. And I worked a bucket load of them in a row. I was driving down the highway and I was trying to stay awake, getting home. And so I was doing math in my head. I know some people listen to music. I just do math. And so I was calculating the amount of money I made by all the night shifts I had worked. And while we're driving down the road, I had just gotten this new car. It was a Honda. It was a stick shift Honda, black, really fast, went very fast. And as I'm driving this car, I look ahead and I see this truck with some loose plywood on the back of it. And it's kind of shaking, you know, like this, bumping up and down. And I said, you know, I better slow down because that could kind of fly off and hit my car. And you know how when Job said, the one in the book of Job, one messenger finished his message, and before he put the period on the end of the sentence, the next messenger came in with the bad news. I no more finished that thought in my brain that piece of plywood took off that bed of that truck and flew up into the air and bam, landed right on the hood of my car. And all that money I made on night shifts, I spent on repairing my car because the other guy drove off. He didn't even know I did it. I had to pay for everything myself, and it was my new car. And I could have been killed, but I was more upset about the expense, right? So it tells you that I really had some lousy priorities. And the reason why I tell you that is because there's a verse in Proverbs that says this: will you set your eyes on that which is not? For riches certainly make wings as eagles, and they fly away like an eagle toward heaven. And I thought that translation for my life at that point was, don't set your eyes on riches lest they take wings like a piece of plywood and break the brand new car you bought, you know. And that was a pretty big lesson for me, that I realized I had set my affection on my appetites on the wrong thing. Now, each of you, you'll go into some specialty, no doubt, and your income level will change drastically and you'll pay off your loans quickly. I mean, I would recommend that, paying off your loans quite quickly. But when you get to that point, you'll suddenly be hit with surplus income and you won't know what to do. And if you don't learn to manage money, money will manage you, and you will become just like any other carnal Christian, living from one new toy to the next, from one other shift to the next, just so I can buy the next thing or go on the next vacation or whatever. And if you're not purposeful, you'll actually end up spending the next 30 years of your life just being a consumer of everything that's tangible, and you don't think spiritually. And I had started down that road, and I was well on my way. And by the grace of God, He intervened and broke my hood of my car. And so I consider that kind of one of those landmark moments in my life where I need to really have a checkup, not from the head up, from the neck up, from my heart. And that began a journey for me. And it began a journey of thinking about medicine and money. And I talked to a lot of Christians who were in medicine, doctors, and I asked them about how they managed money, and no one could give me a good answer. And so it became kind of a passion of mine to answer these questions, right? So let me just open it up real quick. Have you thought about this thing? You know what's going to happen to you in the next 6-7 years? Some of this is going to change drastically. Tell me some of your specialties you're interested in, or where you're thinking you're going to end up. You don't all have to speak at once. Who is it? Daniel, you're the nearest one out. What are you thinking?
The hope is to apply into psychiatry. And also, I'm going to call out Rohit because he's also a fourth year. He joined a little bit later after you arranged our years.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Say that one more time. I missed that.
I said also, I'm going to call out Rohit. He's another fourth year who joined a little bit later.
Oh yeah. Good. All right. So psychiatry, good. What else are you guys thinking about? Have you had enough time to experience anything yet? I recommend emergency medicine. If you're an adrenaline junkie, it's the way you ought to go.
My name is Rohit. I'm a fourth year, like Daniel was saying, and I'm applying to pediatrics this cycle.
Oh, peds, great. Yeah, so my son's in that, and he's having a good time, thinking of going into neonatology. I think the place next is Stanford for him, so that's really good. Yeah, anybody else? Let me ask you something. How much do you think a surgeon makes today? Anybody know?
Well, it depends what kind of surgeon, right? Or
Okay, orthopedic surgeon. How much does an orthopedic surgeon pull down today? $750,000 a year. How much does an emergency medicine doctor pull down today? $350,000 a year. All right, per year. Now you do the math. 3 years, you made $1 million, right? You know how tempting it is to have $1 million lying around? It determines what house you buy, what car you buy. It determines so many things. And if you get married, you and your wife suddenly have this pool, and it is massive. And wow, you're not even 30, and you can easily amass a lot of wealth. It's dangerous. It's really dangerous. So I'm going to tell you a couple of attitudes and things that I found from the Word of God. All right. Now I don't know if you have your Bible, so I'll read these scriptures to you. And this is a big one. This is in Matthew chapter 6. This is the ideology that Jesus Christ is giving for how he would like his regime to be run. And when he speaks about his regime, he wants his kingdom to be laid out, he doesn't talk about rules of do's and don'ts. He talks about what motivates the heart, and that then produces the rule of do and don't. So he says like this: do not lay up for yourselves treasures upon the earth, where moth and rust corrupts and thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust does not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there is your heart also. So as you look forward, one of the things you want to do is concentrate and make sure that your heart is in the right spot, because wherever you put your affection and your attention, that will be what you value forevermore, right? And so I was starting to put my value in the money, and man, we could make money so easy. Oh, if I just make 6 extra shifts for 6 months, we could go ahead and purchase X, Y, and Z. We could take that vacation. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there are certain things that can go with that fuel that. And I was doing that. I was literally laying up for myself treasures upon the earth. And that means you got to be careful, even how much you save. Not that saving's wrong, but sometimes you can trust in your savings account and not God. See, God doesn't care anything about your savings account. If you read the Bible, God is a great economist. He can predict when the market will crash and when the market will fall. How do I know that? In the Kings, he said, tomorrow you'll be able to buy this object for such a dirt low price. I mean, that's an economist. And the next day it was exactly as he said. So I think we ought to pay attention to him, right? So this is a follow-up verse to that. He says, you can't serve 2 masters. This is a classic line. This is in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. For either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be loyal to the one and hate the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. You know what I was doing, my colleagues, what I was doing was I was serving wealth. That's what I fell into that trap. And I was so strongly pursuing wealth, I would number my days and number my when I could buy the next thing. And God was really clear. You can't do both. You're either going to hate the one and love the other, love the other, hate the other. And the point that he's making is you're probably going to leave God out of the picture. So you almost have to make a decision before you have wealth, how you're going to think about wealth. And that's the key. Man, I didn't do that. It all kind of crept up on me. I didn't know it was coming. And then all of a sudden it hit me. When I finished residency, my wife and I traveled to Tulsa. I was going to go into practice in Tulsa. And while I was down in Tulsa, a friend of mine got me in contact with a lawyer. Now, there's only about 3 or 4 lawyers I actually like in the world. There's one in North Carolina. There's one in Tulsa. There's one in the Bible named Zenas. And then there's another one I like over in Iowa. That's about it. I've been sued a couple of times, so I don't have a lot of affinity towards lawyers. And I'm sorry if your relatives are that. But this lawyer was named Curtis Shacklet. And we went in to talk to him about this situation, about wealth. And he sat us down. We looked like 2 kids. My wife and I looked so young. We looked like we were 19, He sat down and he said to us, now listen, we told him our story. And then he said, now listen, you guys, there is no charge for this today. I just want you to listen to me. And Curtis Shacklet said, whatever you do, don't spend it all. I go, what? He said, what happens is you get this wealth and you start spending it, and you spend up so much of your, say, $200,000 per year, 300,000, that it's all gone. It's all spoken for. And then God sends you a need and you can't meet the need. You see, if you're going to meet the need, you have to plan to meet the need before the need shows up. So whatever you do, don't spend it all. I'll never forget that. That was 35 years ago. He told me that, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And what happened over time is I lost track of that comment. And as I got into my working years, I was serving mammon. I was serving wealth. And it all came back to me that day that little plywood hit my hood of my car. It all came back to me with a vengeance. And I said, wow, what can I do? So I want to kind of challenge you today. I want you to have the right attitude towards wealth. Now I'm going to read you another passage that is equally important. Here's what it says in 1 Timothy chapter 6. We'll be looking at verses 3 through 10 and then 17 through 19. Now this is a good one, right? He says, now, if you have any other doctrine than what I'm teaching, you should know those are the words that I'm teaching. This is Paul talking, is the words of Jesus Christ. And then he says this, now godliness with contentment is great gain. See, the idea about money and life and medicine is that you have to have a contentment in God before you get with all this money, because if you don't, the money will take your contentment. It'll become your contentment. And so he says, you need to be able to rest in God and God's provision and God's working in your life and how God was ordered your existence and your equation long before you have anything else, because that contentment is what you need to rest in. Don't find or put your contentment in other things. Wealth is specifically. And he said it this way, we brought nothing into this world, so we can't take anything out. Having food and clothing, with these, let us be content. He's saying God provides you with exactly what you need. Food and clothing are your basic elements. And God does that. He promises to do that. So if that's what he gives you, then you be content. I've been to the mission field several times on medical missions. And I tell you, there's some doctors out there, they've given up their whole lives. They could be making millions of dollars, and they are making peanuts and scraping by, helping communities as they use medicine to bear witness of Jesus Christ. How did they get there? They got there because they learned that contentment in Christ alone is the only thing that satisfies them. And when they have that in their mind, it just does. The food and clothing was enough. And I think we need a generation that thinks differently. We're a wealthy generation. We're a hugely wealthy generation. And what happens is it's affected our contentment factor. So just a couple of thoughts right off the bat. I want you to think about, you can't serve God and money. You'll hate the one, love the other. Number two, there's a contentment in God that must be developed first, so that when money does happen to you, it doesn't eat you alive. Now, there's a third point I want to make to you, okay? And this is how we use our funds, how we use it. And this is what it says in 1 Timothy 6:17. It says, command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty. You see, it's possible with wealth to be arrogant and prideful. You know, and I was that. I was so that I felt like I could talk to salesmen in a demeaning way. I felt that I could tell them where to go if I didn't like their negotiating. I was an arrogant man as a Christian. I'm ashamed of all of that. I'm so ashamed of that. And I did it because I was in this present age, rich, relatively speaking, and thought I could wield my power with it. Then it says this, don't trust in the uncertainty of riches. Now, the Lord taught us this one too. Many of you may not, or may remember 9/11, you know, when the Twin Towers came down. And that very week, we had our house sold for $430,000. And we were going to sign that day. And then 9/11 happened. Everything got canceled. And the next day the buyer bought out. I ended up holding on to that house for another 12 months before I could sell it. And I sold it for about 10% less. I was furious with God. Why would you do that? You know, why wouldn't you let me gain that extra? You know, what was the deal about that? And the thing is I was trusting in the uncertainty of riches. And that's what he meant. Riches are not stable. You think they're stable, but they're not stable. And what happens is you begin to put your trust in it. Now, God gives you all things to richly enjoy. That's what the verse says. And this is what we do. He gives us all things to richly enjoy. So my goodness, I'm going to go enjoy. But that's not what is the next sentence. The next sentence says, you who are rich in this present age, you do good and be rich in good works. And so he's saying, listen, it's not really for your pleasure. It's really to be producing good works, not to be saved, but to evidence your walk in Jesus Christ. Be rich in good works, ready to give, willing to share, willing to share. There's a heart attitude to it. There's an action attitude to it, and there's an outcome to it. The outcome is the good works. The action is ready to give, and the attitude is willing to share. So many times you can have wealth and you'll give, but you'll give begrudgingly and irritatingly and selfishly. And you know, that's not very honoring to God who sees the heart. And so I want to emphasize to you this whole necessity of thinking about not just about wealth, but how to manage it. And what God was teaching us, my wife and I, was how to do that. So along the way, I met with this fella, and he said to me something very profound. Another fella, his name was Dave Hausman. And he said to us, now, do you have debt? And I said, yeah, we do. And he said, man, what I find is that when I have debt, I have to serve the bank. And I can't fully serve God. And I want to fully serve God. I tell you, that made a huge impact on us. Because at that time, we had about $15,000 in credit card debt. And you know what? My wife and I got on our knees. We asked the Lord for help. And we paid off those credit cards in 6 months. And we never went back to being in debt on a credit card. So you say, well, what about a home loan? Well, home loan is what we call a secured debt, meaning if I sell the property, I can pay off the loan and usually have equity in it, right? So that's a little different than unsecured debt. So if I were to sell my home today, we could pay it off and be ahead just fine. But the point is that I didn't want to be shackled to anything else. So when I finished residency, I had a $50,000 loan. Today, I think it's like $250,000. So it tells you how much it's gone up. So $50,000. So what I did is Janet and I, my wife and I, we continued to live like residents, you know, on $20,000 a year. And within a year and a half, we paid back all of our debt. We just got rid of it. You know, years later, I was talking to some of my colleagues that trained me, and they said, yeah, I just paid off my loan. They had been out 30 years, just paid off all their school loans. No, I'm telling you, when you're young like you are, and you've got an opportunity for increased cash flow, use the cash flow to pay off your debt. Be free from any shackles that keep you from serving God. That is such a practical thing. I've never regretted that in my life. That has been the smartest thing God had me do. So he says this. Now, when you see someone in need, this is point 4, and they have this need, you should meet that need. By this, we know that you love one another because Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. And we ought to lay down our lives for the Christians too. You have this world's goods, you have wealth, and you see your brother is in need, and you shut up your heart. You say, no, I'm not going to meet that need. How do you love God like that? That's what John was saying in his epistle, 1 John 3:16 through 23. So as you go through this idea of what you love and where your affection is, if you go through this idea of that you are commanded to be rich in good works and use your wealth in that way, what he specifically says in more packaged form is, let's say you come across somebody and they're in a bad way. Well, you need to be before me, pray, ask my wisdom. And if I confirm that to you, then you should meet that need. So my wife and I took this pretty seriously over the years as God changed us. And I'm gonna share some stuff with you that I'm not saying it to impress you. I'm just telling you this is what I learned. Okay. So what we started to do is we started to set aside what I call a hospitality fund. And every month I put money in that little fictitious account. So when people would drop over, we could feed them and know that I planned to do that. And that hospitality account was linked to our giving. And so what I did there is we decided before God what we could give, and giving sacrificially, where you have to cut back in other areas, that's a good thing. And so we did that. And so between those two, we're probably giving away somewhere around 20 to 25% of our income. Plus I was donating anytime any Christian needed help, I'd fix them on my kitchen counter, you know. And so we're just giving away income. And one of the things that happened was another Christian worker who was an evangelist and a shepherd, they needed a car. We just bought a car. Now I have 9 kids, so we were deep in cars, right? And we just bought a car. And so my wife and I were praying about this other friend's need, and it came to our attention. And so we prayed, and my wife and I came to the same conclusion independently. One day we said, you know, I don't know if you think this, but I think we ought to give away our new car. And it was her car. And she said, you know, that's funny you should say that. I'm thinking the same thing. I think we should give our car to so-and-so. I said, that's who I was thinking. And so we decided to give it to them. And the way we did it, we still needed a car. So we swapped. I gave them ours, brand new car. We took theirs, which was a clunker. And we drove that for about a year. I'll never forget what my wife said to me. She's a great example of Christianity. She said, you know, it is very normal for some of us to eat hamburger while others of us enjoy steak. And that car helped that guy for years, you know? So it wasn't just money, it was possessions, you know? There's time, you give away your time, your energies to help those who are in need. I mean, many times the Christians would call me up, and I always kept a suture kit in my house so I could fix all the wounds on my kitchen counter. Now I, of course, sterilized it so we would not contaminate anything, but it was just an idea of that giving. We did the same thing by donating my energies and time in Africa on several missions trips. We had another one scheduled in June, but it was scrubbed because of COVID. But you want to think about this doing good works and meeting needs, not only in the money part, but in your skill sets, in your possessions. In essence, everything that you own is really God owns, and you're just the manager of his property. And that's how we started to think. And so we got a large house because I had 9 kids and we needed all the space. We used every room in the house, but we would have people come over, parties of 200 twice a year for discipleship. We would teach them in our home. And then we had an open house Christmas party where the Christians could bring their friends, you know. They just come through. One night we had 200 people go through our house, you know. So everything we had, we just gave over to God. You know, when you do that, you have 400 people come through your house in a year. All those appliances that are guaranteed the last 20 years, they last like 3, you know, refrigerator, you're using up its life so fast. Washer and dryer, I go buy one, the guys, oh, last you 15 years, 3 years. Why? I'm doing 5 loads a day. You know, this is just all part of, this is what you give. You're giving everything. You're giving your whole life. And isn't that what you're supposed to be as a disciple? He who wants to follow me, let him deny himself, take up his cross and follow me daily. Isn't that what you do? Isn't that the motif and the code of the disciple? And the only way you start to think about that then is you want to think about it now. That's how you can soften this trial that you all will face in the next 7 or 8 years. I'll just give you a couple of last ones and I'll end with it. There's a passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9. Those 2 chapters are some of the best chapters in the Bible on giving. And one of the principles, one of the tenets is this, and not only as we have hope, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and then to us by the will of God. So Paul's saying, you know, we receive funds from this other group, got Christians in Achaia, and they first gave themselves over to God, that we're doing what we're doing as if we were giving a present or an offering to God himself. And as a result of them, their heart being directed heavenward, they blessed us in an earthly way. And that's how we started to think. When we give our money, we're going to give it as an offering to God. Over time, young people, we just started paying for things. I would pay for people's medical bills. We would, whenever we took someone out to eat, it usually turned into some counseling thing. I'd always pay their meal. And for years, for 25 years, I always paid everybody's bill. And I took my family, my extended family, they're in a bad situation with a marriage and divorce, and I took them on a trip just to get them away and protect them and help them spiritually. So everything became that kind of thing. And we did it because we gave ourselves to God, that if no one else was around, we'd still do this for you, oh God. There's a second principle there. He says this. He says, I'm testing the sincerity of your heart, verse 8, your sincerity of your love. That means that there's no ulterior motive. I don't want you to bring it up. I don't want you to send me a plaque. I don't want to even send you don't even send me a thank you note. Just know I did this because I love my Savior. I love Jesus more than I love anyone else. And because of that, I'm happy to do so. And then the third principle is the motivation. For we know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, what does that mean? Well, when you're rich like Jesus Christ, Bill Gates is a little piece of sand to you. The wealth of God, he makes wealth. That's what he is. And he says, yeah, though he was rich, he became poor. He became poor as a slave, a bondservant of humanity, so that he could pay for my sin. Now, when somebody gives like that, what is that to me if I give a few thousand here or a few thousand there? No, it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing, because he's given so much. He's your model. And that became what we started to live by. The way it works in a Christian body is you give now so that person is provided for. And he says there may be a time when you have need. Well, that happened to us. So all those years I was making that high income money, then I left the workforce to go preach and teach. And I don't have a contract with anybody. I don't go around soliciting money. I'm invited, I'll go. And, based on how the Lord leads a group of people, they may or may not give me a gift. But I'm not going for the gift. I'm going because God wants me to go and preach and teach. And you know what? I trust the Lord to provide for me. That's what he says in the scriptures. The Lord will return it back to you. And, all those people, all those years that I had bought meals for, all of a sudden they're buying meals for us. It was really funny. This last weekend, a family member, whenever we were at their house, we always bought them groceries because we're a big family and they had low income. Now it's changed. I have low income and they have more income, and they bought us all these groceries. It was so surreal, and humbling. Oh boy, that was humbling. But that's how it works. You see, one provides for the other. It's a body. The left hand helps the right hand, and sometimes the right hand helps the left hand. And lastly, I want you to know that when it comes to giving, that is managing money and giving things away, giving property, time, funds, it's intentional, it's thoughtful, it's prayerful, it's planned, it's generous, and it's cheerful. The attitude's right. Here's what he says. Therefore, I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren to go ahead of time and prepare your generous gift. It's intentional. And preparation requires forethought beforehand, which you had previously promised. That's the thoughtful part. Now, I want you to know when God instructs you to give, you got to be in tune with God. You have to be a prayerful individual. If you don't bathe things in prayer, you might do the wrong thing. And so prayerfully, just because you see the need, you got to be a spiritually disciplined person. And we plan for it, and we plan to be intentional. So what we started to do is we had our regular giving, we had our hospitality fund, then I had what I call the special needs fund. Once in a while, somebody comes along your path, they need like $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. And we started funding that every month. We had no idea when it needed to be used. But as soon as it got to a certain point, it seems like God sent us a need and we were able to meet that need. That's what it's about, isn't it? That's called stewardship. This is what Christ did for me. He was so rich. He gave everything. And then, of course, it says, if you sow sparingly, you'll reap sparingly. If you sow bountifully, you'll reap bountifully. In other words, don't be afraid to be generous because God is good for it. And lastly, purpose in your heart. God doesn't set a percentage for you in the New Testament. He just wants the fullness of your heart. So if your heart's full with God, if you have the joy of the Lord, man, just give it away. You ever do that? I did this with God. God, I don't think I have it. This is all I have in the bank. I'm going to give it away to you. It's all yours. And I give it away, and I had nothing left. And you know what? The Lord was pleased. He provided for me. Now, you remember, all those years I worked, I would have huge bank accounts, right? I left and started preaching and teaching. And one day I went to check to see how we were doing. And we had $50 in our bank account, $50. I was making $500,000. Okay. $50. And I said, Lord, you'll have to provide for us, but I'm happy to have given this away to you because you would be honored by my giving. And that's what I did. And so we were down to zero, and the Lord miraculously provided for us in a way that is quite inexplicable. Some family I never met, or I met one time at a conference. We had a conversation at lunch, and they sent us a $5,000 check. $5,000 check out of the blue. I had to go look them up on Facebook to remember who they were. You see, this is my God providing because his word is true. You purpose in your heart. Don't give grudgingly. If you sow bountifully, you'll reap bountifully. So I want to give you a different picture. I went from very general principles down to very specific examples. And I've got stories to tell you. I've got so many stories about how my God has provided for us on a very consistent way. It's called the life of faith. Everybody's supposed to live this way. The harder thing to do is to live by faith when you've got a bunch of money in the bank account. That requires a special discipline. And so I just want to share that kind of part of my life to you. I thought I should give some times for questions and maybe a few answers. Stan's better at the answers than I am. So please go ahead, ask away. You're on mute, Stan.
I was curious if you could tell us more about the decision and the process of leaving medicine to go into more ministry focus.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Daniel. Is it Daniel or Dan? Daniel? Okay. Daniel, it's a great question. So, ever since I was a teen, I had a real affinity to learn the Word of God and to teach it. And the reason why is because I heard some teaching when I was younger, and it was so applicable. It was so right where I was at that I asked God that if you ever would allow me to do that, I would think that would be the greatest thing in the world. So I went to my parents. I said, hey, I'd like to go to Bible school. They said, well, why don't you get a skill set? Well, I picked medicine. That was genius, right? That's like a lifelong commitment, right? And so it was always in the back of my head. And so when I finished residency and got my terminal board degrees done, I was just kind of upset because I hadn't been able to study the Bible for 10 years, and that's all I wanted to do. And I whined to God. I got a PhD in whining. Actually, I don't know if you have that yet, but I have that, and I'm good at it actually. And so I was whining to God, and God showed me that the skills I learned in research methodology and writing technical papers for peer-reviewed journals was really great study skills for the Bible. And so I started studying the Bible. And then the next thing I know, I was asked to teach on various venues. And over about a 15-year window, I got so busy traveling and teaching that I would travel to a place, come home, work, and then travel again and work. Well, that's awful for your family. So I began to ask the Lord, what should I do? I only got two options. I can quit medicine, I can quit teaching, or I can get rid of my third ones. I get rid of my family. And I knew the third one was out. And I'm pretty sure that the Lord didn't want me to give up preaching and teaching. So there's only one thing left. So then I asked the Lord, and I'm ashamed to say this, I asked the Lord for 25 fleeces, 50 fleeces, 50 fleeces. You know what a fleece is? That's that Gideon story where he asked for this animal skin to be dry and the ground to be wet. And then he said, do the opposite the next night. And then I know this plan to go conquer the Midianites is of you. So I asked God for 50 fleeces. I need 50 of them, Lord. Just give me. I lost count after 35. I literally did. One of the more drastic ones was we had, our hospital was very successful. Our ER group was giving an ER product that was seeing patients by a doctor in 18 minutes. That's a metric that you'll have to live by at some point in your lives. And an ER seeing a patient by a doctor in 18 minutes is better than McDonald's, And so we gave them a great ER product, and they just up and said, no, we don't want to do that. And it turned ugly, and all that stuff that goes with turning a system over. I had to, at one point I met with a Christian at the hospital, and she said to me, Dr. Price, what are you thinking about the ER? And I said, oh, I'm thinking I'm going to probably do some medical mission. She goes, well, and this is her out of the blue. I'm a Christian, and I believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross for my sins and rose again. And I just want to tell you, Dr. Price, you need to leave this place and go serve God. She said it 3 times right in my face, this far away. And I left that meeting and I go, Lord, I don't have any idea just what happened there, but how did she know? And why would you have, and were you speaking through your servant, And I went to the Word of God, and the Lord confirmed that I should go. And I left. And that was about 3.5 years ago. I still work some because I need to maintain my license, because I do medical missions. I have to stay licensed for that. But I work like 1 to 3 shifts a month, And the rest of the time I'm either studying, preaching, or teaching, or making YouTube videos or something. So that's kind of the long version, I guess, Daniel. Sorry about that. But that was how the Lord worked in my life. I got so busy I couldn't do 2 jobs. So you only got a couple options at that point. And I haven't regretted that decision one bit. So when Stan asked me to teach and to help out with TNT, of course, that's what God's called me to do. So that's the short version. Thank you.
Yeah, we are exceptionally thankful for Steve as he teaches us faithfully every Tuesday night. We have a bunch of grad students and residents and fellows that attend that. So, but Steve, I wanted to ask you a question that I've often heard from students or even residents, like that. Why can't I, make a ton of money, in medicine, and the more money I make, the more that I can give.
Yeah.
Is a response. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's a great theory. It's virtually impossible to do, because the more money you make, the more tendency you have to skim off the top. That's what I was doing. I was making a lot of money, and I was skimming off the top so I could still make my life as comfortable as possible. If that model is really going to work, you almost have to do it in such a way where you choose to live on a very small amount, a bare minimum, so that the rest could go away. And there are businessmen in this world that do that, Christian businessmen that do that. But I found myself that I had too much love of my flesh, and that I would just say that model to myself, but it was very hard to do because I just kept adding more of the skimming part and making my house bigger or my car nicer or my landscape better, saying it was all for God, but really it was all for me. So I had a heart problem, and it was very hard for me to keep that separated. I realized I either need to totally cut off the income flow or downsize to the point where I'm not having my ugly flesh in there, sinful nature that's sort of fooling me into thinking I'm serving God, but I'm really just skimming it off so I can enjoy it. And so it is possible to do that, but it is a very difficult, spiritually difficult thing to maintain. But I met businessmen and some doctors who've done that, and they've chosen to live on $50,000 a year or $75,000 a year, they're pulling down 400, so they're giving away $300,000 easy per year. But that's a very difficult thing because the money's all there. So and if you do that, you have to get rid of it fast so it doesn't start to, start to call your name. It's kind of like that Proverbs 8 lady that's, the prostitute that's wooing you as you walk by. That's what money does to you. It says, yoo-hoo, come over here. It's okay. It's for God's work, So I found that I had a hard time doing that. And so if I look back on my years, I should have gave a lot more, 2-3 times more than what we did. Did that answer your question, Stan?
Yeah. Are there practical ways that we can ease into that, or do you recommend like going hardcore? Right? Like, I'm just trying to think.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 ways. You're right. In my situation, I needed a hardcore change because I started to get steeped in it, and the more you get steeped in it, the harder it is to change. So I had to make a drastic decision. But on this call, you guys are young, you're starting out, so the way you can do it is you can make intentional decisions as you go right now, where you say, all right, when I get out and practice in, say, pediatrics, so say, pediatrics, you'll make, I don't know, 150, 200,000 a year, we'll say. So you decide, okay, out of that 200,000, I lose 25% in taxes. So I'm down to 150. And then you say, I need to pay off my loans right away. So I'm gonna pay 50,000 the first year. Okay, so that leaves me $100,000. So I've got my wife and I've got a baby. So I'm gonna live, and your wife has to buy into this, that's why it's good to marry a like-minded person, right? And so we're gonna live on 75,000, and that extra 25 we're gonna give away. So the next 2 years later, you've paid off your loans. Now you have a surplus of 50,000. What are you going to do with that? Well, you got to decide. Now you got 3 kids. We need to have, 2 more bedrooms instead of 1. So we're got to scale up. And that's what we did with our house. I'm just explaining the details of how to do this. So we only scaled up on our house to accommodate our family. And if we could make the house more attractive as we went, then we did that, but only for the certain amount that we wanted to spend. So we kept our budget really disciplined. And then we would take that surplus and we'd look to give it away or look to do something with it. People ask me, well, should you invest? And there's a proverb that talks about the ants saving for the winter and all. And so there's some wisdom in saving. But what I found was that when I started to save a lot, I started to trust it so much. And so I decided that I would, this is just me, I would give it away and consider giving to God my savings account, right? Because he said he would reward you. And then my company started to say, well, we want to set money aside. We all had to do it. So I said, okay, take the money that's not in my take-home check. You just put it to the retirement account. And I never saw that money. I still don't see that money. And, when it comes time, I'll need to give that away too. So anyway, I kind of eased into it. And that's what I think you guys have to do when you satisfy your obligations and now you have surplus and you got to balance it with your family. You don't have to buy the expensive car. I used to drive my car to the hospital and all the doctors would give me a time. Hey, Steve, your car's bringing down the average price of the cars in our parking lot. This is what we call peer pressure, right? They had Audis and all this stuff. And so, that was, oh, maybe I need to do that to keep up with them, right? That was the pressure. And I just said to them, listen, I dare you to ding me because I won't care, but you will have a seizure over that. I said, it's just not important to me,
Wow.
I took a lot of grief for that, but so what? What do I care? I don't serve popularity. I serve Christ.
Wow.
And if Christ cared about that, then I'd care about it. But he doesn't care about the dumb car, So that's kind of how we managed our affairs over the years.
Wow. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, that just reminds me real quickly. I remember the first time I met Karen for a date, and she drove up in this Honda Civic, blue used Honda Civic, and my first thought was like, wait a second, I thought you've been a doctor for several years. And that's exactly where my mind went, and so but thankfully, through 6 years of marriage, she's still teaching me. I'm still learning about money and greed and and so thankful, so thankful, especially for the ministry. It's definitely humbled us tremendously, and we're just so blessed to be a part of this ministry and seeing lives that are being impacted for Christ. And so, yeah.